but something that I think I mean, it's something that I've heard multiple times from this committee and members of the committee is with regards to a water management plan. And we also heard it from Wagner and Ball as well. And so something that I'd like to discuss today before we jump into the content of the meeting is, as we review this perimeter protection plan, and our task is to provide the city citizens input for the city staff's response to as approved by council to the Army Corps of Engineers. And what I'd like to discuss today is incorporating in that a recommendation that the city begin a water management plan to be completed on or before the preliminary engineering and design phase of the Army Corps project. And the rationale for that is that if the result of our water management plan ends up at odds with the Army Corps' plan, or ends up in a position where, hey, we need to, work a few things out, and at that point, we'll be armed with the information, both going into the preliminary engineering design phase and, just as importantly, coming out of the preliminary engineering and design phase, given that that's the phase where we're going to get a lot of data about the city. I think important data, geotechnical information, topographical information, basically all, information on the city's existing stormwater system. And so, rationale, of course, is that, questions come up, hey, how does this perimeter wall, everybody agrees it's an important thing. It's been in, every recommendation, but how does it interface and interact with the city's overall water management system? And anyway, point being that I'd like to, bring up for discussion the concept of incorporating a recommendation within our overall recommendation to begin this water management plan and have it completed before we were to enter preliminary engineering and design phase. With that, I'd love to open it up for ad hoc discussion.
Hey, good. I'll just jump in and say I think that's a smart idea. I think this initiative tells an incomplete story without that broader context. And I think it'll be easier for the public to understand the communications that come from this initiative if it's told in concert with a comprehensive plan.
I think Kevin very eloquently put that. I would agree with that recommendation as well. It's something that the George Charleston Foundation has been pushing for since our work on the Dutch Dialogues Charleston final report, and something that we've been pushing in concert with the city as well. So I would support that recommendation.
Chiming in with the conservation and historic preservation interest, have already spoken that we would also be very supportive. Obviously, devil's in the details. I'd love to hear more about how that would actually work and be created and implemented. But that's a second tier discussion, I think.
Dan, I see you with your hands up there.
Yeah. So,
go for it.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's a great recommendation. I guess I echo what Laura's saying. I'm assuming we're going to make a formal recommendation written to the mayor, and maybe we can get Mark to weigh in with respect to having them commence or get working on a water management plan. I'm assuming that there's been some skeletal form of doing this at the city level. So what's the protocol, Mr. Chairman, as to how we're going to put this in writing and put this recommendation in front of the mayor and to city council so that we can make sure that, and maybe we provide a little bit of detail, right? I mean, I think Susan was one of the first individuals that chimed in about the water management plan. It might be interesting to see what are the different steps that we would like to see the city institute to make sure they're getting out in front of this so that there may not be conflicts, or if there are conflicts with the perimeter study, that they can be addressed, and before we dive too deep into that, into the Corps' process.
Yeah, there's a few, Dan, it's a great question. I think there's a couple questions in there. One is, what does that look like? Our recommendation is due in November. But Mark can speak more to process and what that looks like. The second question I heard is really in my mind, a question about time frame. And so, we have a few time frames that are operating right now. And I thought within the summary, the slides that Wagner and Ball put forward, it summarizes those time frames very well, in my opinion. One item is, on that time frame, I believe it was June 2023 would be the kickoff of preliminary engineering and design, were this project to go forward. And that was the date by which the water management plan would be called to be done, was Wagner and Ball's recommendation. And so, with that in mind, I think there's a few things that it's a great actually segue, and not that we necessarily need to segue now without more discussion, but it's a great entry point into today's discussion where the Corps can help us understand more about timeframes and cost commitments at each series of those timeframes. So, I think in my opinion, we'll pose that question to the Army Corps of Engineers and have them help us understand what those timeframes look like.
I just wanted to add that the recommendation for a water plan was not only stressed by the Army Corps, by Wagner and Ball, but it's also included in the resiliency section of the new comprehensive plan or city plan rewrite as a recommendation to the city. So it's part of what everybody is thinking about. And I have the feeling that most of us look at this as step one before we get into something deeper. It's like knowing what your annual budget is before you start the year. So I really believe it's an important thing to do.
Absolutely. And so I think, from my perspective, the question is, what is something deeper, right? What is that, before we get into something deeper, what does that look like? I think today will help, flesh that out a lot. And what does that mean? Cash, I see your hands up.
Yes, and my understanding is that we are sort of partially there in already having a number of the elements of the water plan. We already have a vulnerability analysis. We have the Dutch Dialogues report. We have the 3x3 partially completed. We have the land and water analysis from the comprehensive plan, city plan, and we have our sea level rise strategy. That there are some other elements of the water plan that we would need, ecosystem analysis, H&H modeling, economic and BCA analysis, and some other elements. So we're already partially there. Mark, chime in and correct me if I'm wrong. Definitely, I'm probably missing some pieces, but I think we've got a lot of the components already. They're just some pieces and parts that we need to sort of complete the water plan. So we've done a lot of the work.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in on Cash's point, and I think Danny raised it earlier. So two things: we do have a lot of work, and not only do we have a lot of work that you mentioned, Cash, and our stormwater department has been doing a lot of work on the peninsula as of late, with AECOM looking in areas of the city that really haven't been looked at in quite some time, in addition to the number of other studies they've done. So there's a lot of the really hard work has been done, and even talking to Wagner and Ball about what a water plan would look like, they agree that it's pulling a lot of these parts and pieces together. And then, as a final piece, seeing how all of that would fit with a perimeter protection system. So I agree with you, Cash, and I think it's there. And then just one other thing back to a point that Dan, you made earlier. And we have two council members on the call right now, both Councilmember Waring and Councilmember Seeking. So how would we get to, if this committee were to recommend, and it sounds like you're moving in that direction, a water management plan, that would have to go before the budget committee of City Council that's just getting ready to kick off here in the next month or so, work its way through, come to full council for a vote and before January. So that's the way the process would work. We'd have to design it out and put a dollar amount in the budget. And then once it was approved, you would go ahead and go out for a request for a proposal, see who answered that request for a proposal, and there would be a selection committee assigned. So there's no foregone conclusions on who would do it. There's no foregone conclusions on any of that until it really gets into the budget process and begins to move forward there. So that's where it would begin.
Hey, Bob, I saw
Seekings, anything to add on that?
Oh, sorry, go for it.
Well, I mean, this is something I agree with. I think we need to have a comprehensive plan across the city for a number of things, including water management. One of the things I think, and we've got the Army Corps of Engineers that can comment on this when it's their turn, and Mark will certainly comment on it. But before we do any kind of comprehensive water management plan, we need to know what we've got. I mean, I think we have to probably go do a water table analysis across the city. So there's a number of components to doing all this. So if it's going to be this committee's recommendation, it probably needs to come with some kind of a tiered approach, and then we need to put it into action.
Thank you, Councilmember Seekings. And just one quick add on, and Bob, I know you had your hands up, so I'll give the floor to you right there. Express this one thought is that I think we can ask today of the Corps how much of that information analysis and surveying and engineering and design work would come along with the preliminary engineering and design phase in order to parallel track as much as we can. Bob, give the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you, Hagood. To build on Cashin's comments about, and Mark, about how much already exists, I spent some time going through the 1984 drainage plan. And boy, that's a hell of a document. It just is, it provides so much information. If that was merely updated, I think it would move us in the direction pretty significantly. To Mark's point about, what the standard process would be to provision such a study, I'd suggest to the committee that this should take on the urgency of a priority interrupt. I mean, how can we start this right away, like now? So I think it sounds like there's general agreement that this would be a good thing. And I think if there's any difference in opinion, it might be on the urgency and the time frame, to Hagood's point. Thank you.
Well, I think that's unless anybody else has any other comments, it's probably good. Oh, Jordy, go for it. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in here and agree with the group. I think this is a good idea. And I'm glad we've got the Corps here today to answer some questions, because I think it's really important that we understand, what the process is and how it impacts what we've already accomplished, and then what that looks like going forward. So just want to echo, what the group is saying here, in agreement that this is a good recommendation to make. Great.
Well, if anybody has any other comments, please let me know. And otherwise, Mark and Kalen, if you could, Councilmember Waring, I see you down there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All these are good comments. I mean, Cashin points, obviously, Mr. Littlebird's point. We've got members on council that wasn't even born before the 1984 study. Okay. And that was pointed out to me recently, Councilman Seeking. I think that study is 37 years old. Bob, you're right. It's got an immense amount of information, and we still refer back to it. The problem with the city has been we didn't have the money to do those things, and that's the. I've got issues in the district that I'm pleased to represent, and I'm sure Councilman Seekings does as well. I think all 12 of it, maybe with the exception of well, no, Ms. Del Chapo represents Ansonbar. So I know all 12 council people have aspects in that study that will bring drainage improvements. We just didn't have the money to do it. So we got a lot of good ideas sitting on the shelf. You know, Dutch dialogues being one, but you know, the elephant in the room is funding. So, so I think all these are good ideas. Coordinating the studies that we already have on the shelf makes an immense amount of shape. Somehow in that process, we got to find a way to fund it.
Mr. Waring, I think it's a question of prioritization. Once we have the menu, given funding available and prospective funding that could be accomplished, then it's a question of prioritization. But seeing the whole landscape, I think is necessary before choices can be made.
I agree with you in that, but I mean, that's a priority of choices that played itself out over the last 37 years. We've done, you know, looking back, you know, hindsight being 2020, we did a lot of pretty vertical projects going up in the sky, you know, a lot of ballparks and things like that. And sea level rise wasn't the urgency that it is today. So, I mean, to those who voted and supported those things, you know, right now we can point the finger. I don't think we are, but some people can point the finger. But sea level rise kind of like, I mean, you still got people that don't believe in sea level rise. I mean, can you believe we're still having that debate? But so that system of priority, believe it or not, it's just not in the past. We still having that today. I chair the Public Works Committee, and we have funding in the Cooper and the help me out, Mike, the TIF that we right now want to take the money out to fund the low line, and we've got a drainage basin over on the east side that we hadn't spent. We spent minutes. We know it's going to take 15 to 20 million to fix it.
Yeah, the Cooper River TIF, and then we've got King Street
Cooper
TIF.
River TIF. Thank you, Cooper Jackson TIF. I think that's the name of it. It's a $15 to $20 million fix, and the day as we speak, we're talking about taking funding from that to do the low line. Now, I support the low line. All of us support the low line. I think there's other funding we can, if we had a bigger picture, we can go for. But some of the same solutions and priority that you're alluding to, Bob, I can't tell you how right you are. Do we do a pretty linear park with it, or do we fix a water problem with it? We don't have the money to do both out of that one TIF. So there was a situation earlier, a couple of years ago, where we had a $156 million project with the Spring Fishburne Crosstown, and we had a $45 million change order. That's a heck of a change order. Okay. We were debating among ourselves. I mean, it was a tug of war among ourselves. Do we apply for grant funding for the low battery, or do we apply for $45 million 50-50 grant between the finished Spring Fishburne? And I'm telling you, it was an ugly. You would think if we had these people to work with, it would have happened in a snap. Spring Fishburne would have worked out. Fortunately, the people in Columbia realized that Spring Fishburne was a major highway coming through the town, and Murray Boulevard was not. So they granted the money for Spring Fishburne. Fortunately, they had already been to Charleston. But again, the reason we had our match, we have a King Street TIF that some wanted to do another Marion Square, take the money, buy the U-Haul, make a Marion Square type park on that in a town. Had we done that, we would not have the 50% match, 22.5 million to match the grant that came out of Columbia. So I would ask all you all to ask all 13 members of council, including the mayor, if we're going to put a spending priority on water and drainage and flooding, frankly, some of the prettier projects, it's easy to cut the ribbon on a pretty project that's vertical. When you're working under the ground and spending millions and tens of millions, in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars, it's like you're doing nothing, but you're really doing a lot to preserve the history and the future of the city going forward. So that piece about funding, we all need to push in the same direction on that. If, as we said, it's the water. I used to say the economy is the economy stupid in politics. It's the water in this one. So I ask all your help.
That's well put, Councilman Waring. Thank you. And I noticed, Dennis, I know you had your hand up a little while ago. If you could weigh in, then Susan, I see you have your hand up as well. If you wouldn't mind, if we could, unless it's a pressing discussion before the core, if we could, given timeframes there, kind of discuss it after the core gives their presentation, I would greatly appreciate it just from a process standpoint. Thank you. Dennis, go for it.
Just for a minute, I wanted to say what the councilman was just speaking about was funding. If you can see this, but the medical district did and completed a resilient water management strategy. We'd be glad to share that with the group. Perhaps there might be something there that would save or be helpful. But we had conclusions of things that needed to be done within the medical district, the city, Roper, MUSC, and the VA, and really came down to trying to find money. So I echo what everybody's been saying. We need to help make money funding a priority, and that support this management plan that you've suggested.
Well, thank you all very much. And Mark, if you wouldn't mind, Mark and Kalen, if you wouldn't mind introducing our guests here today.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with us today, we have 3 members of the Army Corps of Engineer team that worked on this project for over 3 years now. So they're very intimate with the project. I think most of you know Mr. Wilson, who has led the project manager for this project, has really been out and about in the city and spoke to a lot of people online because all this has happened through the pandemic. Nancy Parrish works in Charleston as well. I believe Nancy is the chief of planning over in the district over in Charleston, and Nancy has really been sinking her teeth into the project. And then Vimini Var, who's our friend, our economist friend from Alabama, who has really spent an incredible amount of time and effort on the economics of this project, and has just really committed himself and his whole team to looking at the economic side of this. So we've got 3 distinguished members here today from the Corps. I asked them to run through a series of things. And really, I took those from what I've been hearing from the committee. So you're not going to get a rehash of the project, but you're going to get some of the things I heard from this committee that you're looking for. And at the end of it, if you'd like more, then we can just ask for questions. And I'm sure they'll be happy to work through those. And if we don't get the questions, we'll get them afterwards. If you put them in the chat, we'll get them back to you. So anyway, we'll kick it off to Mr. Wilson.
Hey, thank you, Mark. I am going to share a couple slides, hopefully. Not too many. Let's see here. All right. Mark, can you see the slides?
You're good.
Okay, let me try to make these a little bit bigger. All right, so based on what we have this morning, I'm going to run through the core timeline. We'll talk short term and then long term. And then I'll turn it over to Mr. Vimini Var, who's going to run through our economics. I understand how benefits are determined. That's a big thing we do in feasibility phase. Then we'll go over to Nancy Parrish. She'll discuss Section 106 and EIS. And then finally, we'll close with a PED discussion, because I know you guys are interested in the timeline. So let's talk a little bit about short term. In March of 2021, we had a public NEPA scoping meeting as we transitioned to an environmental impact statement. We did get a significant number of comments, and that we are incorporating into our report. Right now, our team is updating costs based on the optimization alignment. We're updating costs for visual mitigation, cultural mitigation, environmental mitigation. And in addition to that, we're doing a gross appraisal for the real estate and updating construction costs. So we take all of these costs and we combine them into a total project cost summary. And at the end of June, we hold an internal cost schedule risk analysis. I know there's a lot of core terms here, but they're all very important. And what this cost schedule risk analysis does is it defines our project contingency. And the project contingency is based on assumptions we made in our cost estimate. In the month of July, we are going to be pens and papers writing the draft EIS. The team members are going to be writing the appendices for their particular sections. And then from there, our lead planner will incorporate all of that information into our main report. In addition, in July, concurrently, the City of Charleston has a section in our main report. That section of the main report is for non-federal sponsor views. This is standard in all of our feasibility reports. So the city can provide us with a written statement that we will plug into the main report. In the month of August, we will release a pre-read-ahead copy of our draft report to the City of Charleston and our agencies that are cooperating in our EIS. And while they get a chance to get a pre-read-ahead view of the draft report that's going to be eventually released to the public, there will also be a concurrent internal, we call it a district quality control review of that report. Make sure we got all the I's crossed, all the I's dotted, T's crossed, and it's ready for public review. On September 10th is the kickoff. This is our current schedule. September 10th is the kickoff to the release of the report to the public, and it's going to be a 45-day review. And then in September of 2021, we'll probably finally get a chance to hold some in-person public meetings and workshops. And we'll also probably do a virtual workshop as well. So we'll do a hybrid approach there. From there, November, at the end of the calendar year, November, December timeframe, the City of Charleston has to submit a letter of support for our National Economic Development Plan or our recommended plan that we have. In addition to that letter of support, there's also a financial capability agreement that has to be signed by the chief financial officer, and that's all part of the final report package.
Hey, Wes, what was that date? Wes, what was that date
Yes,
again
sir.
for the commitment from the city?
We're looking for a commitment from the city at the end of the calendar year.
Okay, that's not on your time frame line here. Okay, great, thanks.
Yes, sir. And then in March 2022, we submit our final report to our Atlanta division office. In the spring of 2022, we have a state and agency final review of the report, and that's a 30-day review. There will be no formal comments taken. That'll be a final review to ensure that comments and questions were incorporated into the report. August 2022 is the final report signed by the Chief of Engineers. So that does not include, we have not been authorized and we have not been appropriated just because we have a final signed report in August 2022. We have 3 additional phases. The next phase is the design phase or the pre-construction engineering design phase. So that's also known as the PED phase. The first time we'll be eligible for funding for design phase would be through the FY23 work plan or the FY24 budget. So the FY23 work plan, that would more than likely come out work plans typically come out in March, April of that calendar year. So March, April of 2023. That would be the first time funding would be, if funding is available, obviously it competes across the Corps for funds. That would be the first chance for PED funds is work plan of 2023. So what do you expect to see in this next release of the draft report? You're going to have an updated cost estimate. We're going to have updated benefits. We're going to have that city input into the main report. We'll have updated mitigation plans, programmatic agreements, and Nancy will touch on some of that here in a second. And we'll have additional opportunities for public input and public comment. So with that being said, I don't want to spend too much on timeline. We do have some PED timeline discussion down here at the end. So I will turn it over to Vimini Var to run through the benefits.
Thank you, Wes. Can everybody hear me well?
Yes, I hear you good.
Yep. All right, thank you. So Wes, we have some technical difficulties here. I can't see your screen, but I'll talk to the slides. Anyways, I have it up on my screen. So if you're on the comparison of benefits slide there.
Yep.
All right. So I don't know what the committee wants me to talk about. So I'm just going to present on the high level in regards to our economic analysis. Full disclosure, Mark can attest to this. He sat through a day and a half of me going through technical weeds and the analysis per se. I'm not going to subject the committee to that. But however, I just wanted to highlight some points in regards to how the benefits were derived, what it consists of from the high level and the method that we took. So I'm going to start, I guess, backwards and then go forward, so to say. Bottom line up front, what you see here on the table is basically a summary of our cost benefit analysis. What you see here is the project first cost and then compared to our benefits. The first cost in itself is just the cost of the perimeter 12-foot perimeter wall that we did for our TSP. I want to make note that these numbers will change. As Wes mentioned earlier, we're updating our draft report, and planning is a iterative process. So what you see here will change, but the method and how the benefits were derived, the concepts behind it are the same. But however, these numbers will change. But I thought I'd just present this so you have a point of reference into how we came up what we came up with. I'll go into a little bit more details with these numbers, but as you can see here, we compare cost to the benefits, and you can see that we have net benefits minus our costs, and the core likes to average annualize numbers, so to say, to put it into perspective of, because we look at a 50-year period of analysis, and therefore you derive benefits on a per annual basis, so to say, given that 50-year period of analysis. The bottom line there is the BCR, which is our benefit cost ratio. So it's positive at 2.2, meaning that we're estimating that for every dollar a project costs, we get $2.2 back in regards to benefits. So the question becomes now is, what exactly is this benefit? So as you can see on these bulleted points here to your right, I just wanted to highlight the method that we use. So what we adhere to from planning to conduct our planning study is what we call our Engineering Regulation 105-2-100. Basically, is our planning guidance notebook. And within our planning guidance notebook, there's our principles and guidelines, how we conduct our analysis. I wanted to highlight that we establish evaluation of alternative on 4 accounts: NED, EQ, RED, and OSC. Let me tell you what these acronyms stands for. NED is the National Economic Development, EQ is Environmental Quality, RED is Regional Economic Development, and OSC is Other Social Effects. So within these 4 accounts, those basically establish the benefits. However, per our guidance, we are to, from a federal interest standpoint, we are required to identify the NED plan, the alternative which maximizes net benefits, and then what is exactly is NED, so to say. So well, what it means is in terms, it's expressed in monetary units or dollar value, and are direct net benefits that accrue not only to the study area or planning area, but to the rest of the nation. So it's a value to not only the local area that we're implementing the project to, but also a value to the nation. That is what distinguishes NED from the other 4 accounts in that aspect. And that is why we have to identify that plan, because it's an interest to the nation as a whole. So the next question probably comes to mind is, what exactly constitute or consist an NED benefits? Well, what has been established is reduction in flood hazard. So a reduction in flood hazard, regardless of where it is in the nation, is looked at as a benefit. If we can reduce those flood hazards, it's a benefit not to the nation as a whole. So that's accepted, and that's noted in that aspect. So I put this little section 308 here in flood management plan. I'm not going to go into it per se, but there is a caveat, so to say, that during our benefit cost analysis, that we don't want to reward risky behavior. Therefore, if you do build in a floodplain after 1991, you should adhere to federal or local ordinance in that regards of building above the 100-year. If so, again, we don't want to introduce risky behavior, so therefore it shouldn't be accounted in our benefit of cost analysis. So I just put it there just for reference. So next slide, please, Wes. So the question becomes is, excuse me?
Yeah, sorry, Bimini, I'll just let you know I switched slides.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, how do we actually derive this NED benefits? So what I have here, again, this is just more of a high level. What I use and my team use is what we call an economic model. The economic model we use for the coastal storm risk, business line is what we call the generation to coastal model. Now, it is a probabilistic life cycle cost analysis model, but it's also event driven using Monte Carlo simulation. So there's a lot of word there, but in short, we understand that we don't want to we use a model that's deterministic. We recognize that there's risk and uncertainty given our assumption that goes into the modeling. I'll explain that a little bit later. So therefore, we want to use a model that understands and let us use incorporating these risks and uncertainties. So that's what G2CRM let us do. But of course, we have to derive at a number, so to say, for lack of a better term. So therefore, it should be event driven that we to come up with a number, so to say, or results. So how does it do this? Well, as you can see, here's a picture. Basically, it consists of engineering input as well as economic input. The engineering input, I defer to my engineers to give me that, but again, I'm being the economist and responsible for running that economic model. So what happened was that they, again, assume, storms events, so to say. We have 25 synthetic storms that we produce for the draft report, and you can kind of see these storms here. And so we simulate that across a 50-year period of analysis at 100 iterations. Again, we understand that there's risk and uncertainty, so we run it enough times, we have a convergence in regards to the results. Okay. So we do this for what we say for the future without. We establish the flood damages for future without, meaning that there's no project in place. And then we simulate that same scenario with all the assumption that we have in the future without, but not with the future with, but just introducing the alternative. And then, simulating that flood damage again. And then we basically get the difference. This difference is the reduction in flood damages. So that in a nutshell is basically your benefits. And your benefits is this reduction in flood damages. As I mentioned before, there's lots of assumption that takes into place. And the model incorporates this assumptions, including risk and uncertainty. So I listed some examples there. For example, we know we take into account sea level changes. We take into account our period analysis. We take into account first floor elevation of structures, the types of assets and values, and the depth damage functions that we use in our modeling assumption. Wes, next slide, please. So This next slide, I know there's a lot of going on, but this is basically some of the assumption that goes into the modeling. You know, the model is highly intensive in regards to the data that's needed to run it and the input that goes into it. So therefore, I spent a lot of time in the city of the peninsula in itself, you know, gathering these data to go into the economic model. So I presented some of here and on this slide. So what I mean by damage, flood damage reduction benefits, the question becomes damages to what exactly? So the assumption here is assets. So I took an inventory of the peninsula in itself, taking into account, you know, the structures and the content values of what I see on the peninsula. So that's basically the asset that goes into the model. So that's structure and content value. Okay. I got these assets from the county tax assessor database, which we worked with Mark and his team there also to get this information. But also in these assets, there's certain assumption that goes into it because the value in the content is basically a derivative of what exactly consists of the structure, i.e. occupancy type. So as you can see here on the far left there, most of the peninsula in itself are 75% are residential structures, different kind of residential structures, but residential structures nonetheless, okay? So if you look at your far left here, again, another assumption takes into account the first floor. The reason why the first floor is so important is because if water doesn't get into the structure doesn't necessarily get damages to the content or the structure in itself. You could have water surface elevation on the ground. So we take into account that, you know, usually we do have depth damage function that takes into account damages below the first floor, but mostly we want to make note of what gets into the first floor. So for example, to buy down that kind of uncertainty and assumption, I spent the week in the beautiful city of Charleston, driving around, observing the structures there, as well as using GIS layers to identify the ground elevation and to observe what the first floor of the structures are. Again, keep in mind that, as I mentioned, where we know that there's risks and uncertainty in regards to every input parameters. And so what I mean by I take an inventory of the structure, I'm doing it more from a feasibility level. It's not a structure by structure analysis, but more, you know, as a whole to see, hey, you know, what does the inventory looks like, ground truthing it in a way. All right, so on the bottom there, this is a breakdown of the structure counts by our model area. The model area, I'm not going to go into details, but it's basically how I split the peninsula up. Was there a question?
I wanted to cover the middle section first, and then work outside, so we're not doing all these cuts.
There we go. Go for it, Bimini. I think that was just muting and unmuting.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Thank you.
So the model area is more from a modeling standpoint, but I know we use that in our feasibility report in itself. So I took a count of the structures there, and then assessed the structure value and content value. And what you see there is the total sum of what the asset value is that I've used as my input into the model. Now, again, these numbers will change. Please keep in mind. But if you're curious to see how I derive that number and what I'm using, it could be a little bit low or high in some people's mind. But please take into account here where I'm using, if you look at the arrow, these are what we call depreciate replacement cost estimate. I'm going a little bit in the technical weeds of it, but I think it's a point to make here, because you know, the city of Charleston is a beautiful place, and I know, you know, the market value is high in that aspect, but we don't take that to an account. We take what we call the depreciate replacement cost. Basically, it is the cost to, to construct it, new, so to say, absent of land or location value, so to say. And the reason for this, again, as I referenced earlier, we're looking at from a national economic development, aspect. And so, taking into account the historical context of, Charleston and everything like that, it's probably, if you're just taking into account the location itself, the structure, there is probably a higher value. I know that compared to where I live in Mobile, Alabama, that, my little, I could not afford living on the peninsula per se. But nonetheless, it's trying to level the playing field in that aspect. So I just wanted to highlight that notion that the estimated cost for these structure and content values based off what we call depreciated replacement estimate. Okay, so once we get the value of the assets, we apply the depth damage function. These depth damage functions are used to say, hey, if you get this much of structure wet, the percentage damage, you get this X amount of damages, based on a percentage. And again, we're applying risk and uncertainty. So we're not using, one strictly value, but a triangle distribution, so to say, to come up with it. So these depth damage functions are established from empirical evidence, observed evidence, as well as expert elicitation for some more of your commercial aspect of it. So all of these gets vetted through our review process and everything to make sure that these are appropriate functions to use. Again, so all of this goes into the modeling, and what you get basically is what you saw at that beginning slide where I showed the summary of our benefit cost analysis. Again, I kind of summed up what I did in probably 10 or 15 minutes with 3 slides. But hopefully, again, this is showing you the high-level view, what entails the benefits of the project, so to say, and how we figure out it to be, a federal interest, so to say. So I know there's probably questions, and I guess we'll take care of that, towards the end. So that is all I have. So I'll return it back to you, Wes.
Thank you, Vinny.
Hey, Wes, just a quick administrative point. As it relates to questions, please, go ahead and enter them in the chat function of Zoom. If you can't, then, or, technical issues, whatever it may be, then just, raise your hand at the end, and I'll just go in the order that I see raised hands. But to the extent you can, I think the chat function helps kind of keep a process. But Wes, sorry to jump in there. Just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Just a couple more slides. We'll turn it over to Nancy Parrish to talk a little bit about Section 106 and EIS.
All right, thanks, Wes. I hope y'all can hear me. I just want to run through sort of quickly about the National Environmental Policy Act and why we are doing an EIS. We originally started this study doing an environmental assessment, and which is the EA on the slide. And we did take a pivot this year, decided to do the environmental impact statement, which is a more in-depth analysis under the NEPA process. NEPA requires the federal government to just identify potential impacts of an undertaking on the natural and human environment. And then, we work towards mitigating those impacts. When we believe that, well, when NEPA starts, you start with an environmental assessment until you get to a point where you're finding that there are impacts that are considered significant or they're beyond our ability to mitigate for them, then we need to pivot to the EIS. So, as I said, we started this project doing that environmental assessment, which is how the process works. Last year, when we released the draft report and integrated environmental assessment to the public in April of 2020, we got back hundreds of comments. And a lot of them focused on these top 4 bullets in this slide having to do with visual or aesthetic impacts, what it looks like, what it does to the way it feels to be in the city. Cultural resources impacts, which we were certainly tracking, being such a historic town, to historic city. Again, the wetland impacts into the marsh as we put this wall in place, so something else we were tracking anyway. And then environmental justice concerns, which is when an undertaking disproportionately impacts communities identified in the executive order, but generally communities that are minority or low income or in some other way disadvantaged or underserved. So we just look for a disproportional impact, a negative impact to communities of those kinds of concerns. So we have made this switch to the EIS because we are finding that we're having tremendous impacts from a aesthetic perspective in particular. The wetland impacts to the marsh, we have during our optimization period reduced the number of acres of wetlands that we're impacting. The marsh is really what it amounts to. We pulled a lot of the wall onto high ground, and that meant we were not having that environmental impact, and which is great for us. We're working with our resource agencies on how to mitigate a few areas where it's not feasible to bring the wall onto land, and so that we still have an impact to the marsh. I'm going to talk about cultural resources. That's our Section 106 process. That's the next slide. And then for the aesthetic and visual resource impacts, we're doing a fairly in-depth study, a visual impact assessment. So that there's a team headed by the Corps, but includes members from the city and I think a couple other stakeholders to assess what those impacts really are, and then talk about how it is we may mitigate for those impacts. So for the visual impact assessment, that's one of the things that this EIS that we're doing, the change is allowing us to do that more in-depth analysis for the visual impacts. At this stage, because we are only in feasibility, we're identifying what the impacts are. We are not identifying the mitigation yet because a lot of that mitigation will come in the form of design, and the design happens during the pre-engineering and design phase, right? What we call PED. You hear us saying that all the time, PED. And so some of those mitigation measures will be worked out in PED, but we our process, just because one phase ends, the next phase starts, they're not necessarily completely separated. Like a lot of the team members, most of the team members will continue to work on the project as it goes into PED. The visual impact analysis will continue, the environmental analysis continues, cultural resources with the same team members. So it's an ongoing process as we move through PED from feasibility. I think the bottom red text there is kind of the takeaway for this change to an EIS. It allows for more detailed and robust analysis. It will allow for more detailed mitigation planning. And an EIS allows for more opportunities for public input during feasibility. And then again, we'll have public input during PED as well. So as Wes, I think, mentioned at the very beginning, we had a public scoping process. We had a public scoping meeting, and we were open for comments in March for 30 days. So that was the first of the EIS generated public input opportunities. And then we have our draft report release here coming up before too long this summer, which will be another input point on the actual EIS itself. Want to go to the next slide? This is just a general timeline. This is like what I've been just speaking of. We're kind of where the star is. There's not a good spot for it, but we finished our initial scoping in the spring with our scoping comment period. We are currently developing the the EIS. And I want to point out that the environmental impact statement, the EIS, is integrated with the draft feasibility report. So it's all one report together. It's not a standalone document. And so if you looked at our report last spring, the draft report we released in April of 2020, that was the integrated draft report and EA. And this will be similar. It will just have more robust analysis in the EIS part. And as Wes mentioned, we've got a programmatic agreement to handle our cultural resources. We've got a memorandum of understanding towards our visual impact analysis. That visual impact analysis report will be part of the draft release, and it'll be a heftier document. So that's coming up in the fall. And then we go through our process as Wes laid out in the first slide, where we've got certain due dates and milestones where we get particular reviews internally and through our vertical team, culminating in the submission of a final report that goes for a state and agency review. That is a 30-day review, and the state and agencies are, like Fish and Wildlife Service and NIMS and those resource agencies. They're reviewing it at a higher level. This is not a public review. We don't solicit comments. They are making sure that any comments that have been given to us have been addressed adequately in the document. And so it's kind of a process review piece that happens at kind of a high level within these organizations. And then we send it to our chief of engineers in Washington, D.C. for signature. And that, once he signs the chief's report, which is him signing off on our feasibility, and then the record of decision, which is the NEPA decision document that as a result of that EIS, then we can go to Congress and ask for authorization for the project. Once it's authorized, as Wes said, we can put it in our work plan and ask for appropriations. So the next slide. All right, so for cultural resources, we deal with, you hear us call it Section 106 all the time. It's the National Historic Preservation Act. It's Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. And like NEPA, that requires federal agencies to consider impacts of their undertakings on the natural and human environment, the National Historic Preservation Act requires us to look at the impacts our projects may have on historic properties. And historic properties are both archaeological sites, or more relevant here in Charleston are the buildings that we have that are historic. And there's a view shed analysis there, and we're working very hard to sort of separate the view shed from a historic perspective versus the visual impact analysis. They're slightly different. That one's more aesthetic, and under 106, it's specifically related to the historic properties and the elements by which they are considered eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, whether they're on it or not, or whether they're designated as a landmark or not. We still take into consideration impacts if they would be eligible. So we have been doing a lot of coordination with like the Historic Charleston Foundation and other stakeholder groups like that. We have regular, fairly regular working meeting. We're currently, we have developed a programmatic agreement. It is under legal review right now. I saw that our Office of Counsel got responses to comments back to Meredith Moreno, who is the Cultural Resources Specialist, who's responsible for ensuring that we manage this process. Once we've addressed all of the comments that we got from the stakeholders and signatories on that document, she will send it back out to them to look at it again. It's an iterative process. I know Vimini used that phrase before for planning, and kind of everything we do is we do the work, we send it out, we get the response, we review and respond, we send it back out, we get it back checked. So a lot of our work is iterative in that way. And Section 106 is absolutely no different. The programmatic agreement that we are developing lays out exactly how we will define impacts, how we will take into consideration the significance of those impacts, how we will come to decisions about mitigation for those impacts, and the input points for all of the stakeholders in that process. A lot of this will happen during our PED. It'll begin to happen as we get designs sort of actually designed, right? At this point in feasibility, everything is just, well, it's just, is it feasible to put a structure, you know, a barrier around the city or not? In PED, we will actually start to design what that thing really looks like, where it will be situated. And as those designs progress, we will be able to identify potential adverse impacts to cultural resources. And that's when we'll start this, we'll continue the consultation with all of our signatories and consulting agencies based on the programmatic agreement that we're developing right now. So it really lays out in tremendous detail exactly all of the steps and everybody's responsibility, their opportunities to comment, and how that process will work, so that when the time comes, that groundwork is already laid out. Everybody knows how we're going to step through that and what their role will be, and are assured that they have a role and a say in how we do that analysis and determine the mitigation. And that's actually all I have for NEPA and the Section 106 process. They're both ongoing, and there's a lot of continual communication with stakeholders and the city throughout both these processes.
Thank you very much, Nancy. We greatly appreciate that. And I know there's a PED note coming as well, so looking forward to going through that as well.
So, yep, well, I have one more slide, and I promise I will run through it. I know everyone's been on the call about an hour now. So what is PED? So first time PED could potentially be funded if we continue our same schedule is the FY23 work plan or FY24 president's budget. First thing we do in PED is we enter a design agreement with the city of Charleston. Right now we're operating under a feasibility cost sharing agreement. So that's the agreement that the city and the Corps are working under now under feasibility phase. So we'll enter something similar during design phase. City is required to acquire all of the real estate for the project. However, they get a credit towards their cost share on that real estate acquisition. We cannot award a construction contract until all of the real estate easements have been acquired in the city. There's also a question, who does the design? It doesn't have to be the Corps of Engineers that does the design. It doesn't have to be the city. It could be an A&E, could be a hybrid approach. The design could be done all at one time. Good design could be separated into phases. It's who does the design. We leave room for flexibility there. Typically, I've seen on other projects, it's a hybrid approach where you have in the A&E, city, and the Corps all doing the design for this. And the betterments are a city decision. That's based on funding available. Betterments are 100% funded by the city of Charleston. I will say, I forgot to mention at the beginning that this pre-construction engineering design phase is also cost shared. It's a 65-35, so 65% federal, 35% non-federal. And I just put a couple of the engineering activities. I know you guys are interested. I know you're talking about your water management plan. Some of the things that we will do in our PED phase is we need more survey information. Where are the utilities? We need some topo surveys, archaeology potentially. We need some geotech information, subsurface soil investigations. We need to know where that final alignment is and then go ahead and do some borings. Seepage analysis, earth pressure, pile design. There could be some instances where we look at, instead of a T-wall, as we've recommended in our report, we do an I-wall. I-wall is not resilient. However, it requires much less real estate for construction. And then, of course, we've only done a on the street surface drainage, surface hydrology modeling at this point. We do need to take into account what's under the earth. So what we need to do is subsurface drainage analysis. And then two things the Corps always does on these massive projects, we'll do a value engineering and risk assessment. So right now, I think we've got 80 some gates along this 8-mile footprint. I can tell you right now that number needs to be reduced. There's a lot of risk associated with these gates. There's a lot of operation and maintenance costs associated with these gates. And we will look at reducing these gates in numbers during that design phase. And of course, we'll have public input. As we walk through the process, I just put some numbers out here, 35%, 65%, 95, 99. Depending on who does the design, we'll have public review, stakeholder input. We'll have some, finally get to show you guys some conceptual drawings at that point, and then take it from there. But that, our plan, you know, like I said, if we can get this chief's report signed in August 2022, the first time we are eligible for funding would be FY23. So it could move pretty fast into the PED phase. There will be more activities that we have to do in PED. I just wanted to list a couple of the engineering tasks here, as I know that was important for the group to understand kind of what additional analysis will take a hold. But with that being said, I don't have anything else on the slides. Hey, good. If I'm going to actually minimize this so I can see everybody again. I've been talking to a screen for the past hour.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
And perfect. There we go. Oh, looking at myself there. Really appreciate your time and everybody's time and effort putting all this together. You know, one thing that, and I'll go through a list of questions for y'all, and one thing I'd like to kind of discuss and you know, help lay out there is, and this is probably a question for Wes and maybe Bimini as well. But you know, what does our 50-year project? It's a big horizon, right? What is our kind of time? And y'all did a good job of laying out the time commitment, saying here are the number of different reports that'll go forward. Here's the beginning of PED, which was August 2023. What are the city's kind of cost commitments and cost outlays? So, you know, both commitment and spending as we get up to and then through the PED phase. Would you mind walking me through that? And, you know, just looking for kind of specifics are great, but I think the intent is kind of general and high level.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So right now, the city hasn't contributed any funding thus far to the feasibility phase. Typically, these feasibility phases are 50-50. So the first time city contribution could occur is in the FY23 work plan. And the Corps is not going to ask for $300 million in the FY23 work plan to get design started. We budget based on an annual basis. Okay, so if I'm putting together a scope of work, and in FY23 I can execute $10 million to get a contract awarded to an A&E, the city's contribution would be $3.5 million. The Corps' contribution would be $6.5 million, and that's just budgeted on an annual basis. So in FY24, we look at the scope of work. I can say I can award another A&E contract for $20 million. The Corps would budget 13, the city would do 7. Math might be a little off there, but that's how the budgets kind of roll out. We budget on an annual basis. We budget based on what the Corps can execute in that given year. Where the big numbers really hit are construction. Okay, so again, I'm going to use big round numbers here. We don't award half a construction contract. If we have say we award a big construction contract to a large construction company in 2026, 2027, $1 billion construction contract, the city's contribution would be $350 million at that time of award. The Corps of Engineers would contribute $650 million. So it's still 65-35 for construction. So we budget on an annual basis, but we also have to budget for the full construction dollar value for that particular contract. I know y'all use a lot of round numbers and they're not exact. But the bottom line is we budget on an annual basis. And we also have to fund the construction contract as a whole. And I hope that answers your question, Hagen.
It does. I mean, what do you think based on your experience, having done these before, I mean, what's your guess as far as just a range on what the PED phase would cost in total dollars?
So,
not to put,
because we don't, right. So again, it's on an annual basis. I'm expecting the PD phase to be 3 years. And I would assume that PED would be between, I'm going to give you a range because I don't have an exact dollar value, between 40 and 60 million based on the current scope of the project.
Great. No, I appreciate that. And, you know, a lot of the thought there is just kind of laying out what everything looks like step by step. And because again,
Correct.
50 years
Absolutely.
is a long time.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I'll go down the list as far as questions go. So from Bob Habig, would the Army Corps of Engineers share with us the projected returns of other 3x3 projects under consideration? And yeah, I'll add on to that. You know, what beyond that specific question, you know, what do those look like usually? You know, what do you see kind of come across as far as the BCAs and projected returns?
So I'll be the first to admit, I am not familiar with other benefit cost ratios around the Corps. You guys in Charleston have my full attention, so I will get you some numbers. I don't know, Mark. I know Mark has talked with Norfolk and Miami in the past. I don't know if he has some information there, or we could talk to Corps leadership and figure out if they could give us some numbers on similar projects as this.
Yeah, so one thing I'll throw out for the entire group right now, and a good timing, on June 15th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we are hosting a session right here at Clemson University. We are bringing in the cities of Norfolk and the cities of Miami, along with the Corps members that you see on the call today. As well as a number of other experts. Wagner Ball are coming in, and we're going to do a 2-hour roundtable from cities around the country that are actually doing these projects and how we learn from each other. Every member of this committee is invited to that session. You don't have to sign up for the conference. I'll send the information out. You are all invited to attend to that particular session. It'll be at I believe it's the Charleston Historical Society, but let me get you that information. The intent there is this team of cities has been meeting on a regular basis, and we wanted to get that team together, do it in a more formal format, and then obviously I think it would benefit everybody on this particular call to hear the different discussions from all of the different cities.
That's great.
Thank you. So the next question is from Dennis Frazier. Where's the medical district in that cost chart? And also Doug Warner asked this question. Would you share a copy of this report, just the slide deck with us, and that'll help be a reference point and relate to Dennis's question as well.
So the medical district in Bimini, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is under the Marina model area. So we divided the peninsula up into 5 model areas. We had the Wagner Terrace model area, the Marina model area, Battery, Port, and New Market. And this was done for not necessarily to separate the peninsula into different sections, but it's easier for analysis and to roll up the economics and the structures and asset values in that regards. And Bimini, anything else on that?
No, you're absolutely correct, Wes. So the medical district is lumped into what we call the marina there. And I don't know if you're showing that slide or not, but that's probably, you know, in terms of structure count and value-wise, the highest in the peninsula.
Thank you. And then, and the other note is from Susan Lyons is, do you expect the BCR to go higher than 2.2, which would make the project more competitive? I know that relates to kind of Susan, my addition to that. Now, Susan, you may or may not agree, but of course, the benefit cost ratio is all about the comparative likelihood of a project receiving the funding. And so, as long as it's positive, I think as a community, it's a good thing. But anyway, that's an aside. But yeah, the question is, do you expect there to be an increase in the BCR based on all the different factors you're comparing right now?
Right, and without actually running the numbers, like I said, we're getting into the cost schedule risk analysis at the end of June. That's going to determine our contingency. That means got some more economic modeling to do. Part of our optimization, as Nancy stated, was getting out of the marsh, moving the wall into high ground. That reduced construction costs by 2.5% or 2.5 times. To construct in the marsh is 2.5 times more expensive than to construct on high ground, from not only an environmental standpoint, but a constructability standpoint. That was one of our main goals of optimization, was to, one, make a more environmentally sound, more cost competitive project. And I believe, well, again, I don't have the final numbers in front of me. I don't want to make any promises, but I do think that number, that 2.2, will go up. How much it will go up, I'm not sure yet, but that will be in the next release of the report.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. And then, I know we're running up on time. So Doug, I want to do Doug's question. And then we have, hey, Nancy, there you go. State funding is fine. Only federal funds are not allowed. Doug, I don't know if that answers your question. Yep, good. Okay, cool. And then the last thing I want to do, just again, we're just running short on time. And first off, thank you very much for the Corps for being here, sharing your thoughts. Sure, we'll have a lot of follow-up questions. I know this is obviously a huge deal for us, and appreciate all your diligent and hard work and helping us protect our city from water risk. So I'd like, kind of along that same vein, I'd like to. We don't have the full committee here, and both council members have left. I know we're gone a little long, but it's obviously an important topic. I'd like to, and Galen, let me know if there's anything procedurally I need to do here. But go, get a vote and show of hands from the city to incorporate a water management plan in our overall recommendation, and also recommend a water management plan begin now to be done by the beginning of the preliminary engineering and design phase. And so, Kaylin, again, I'm not an expert on the rules of order here. What do I do at this point?
You would ask for a motion from the floor, and then you would look for a second, any conversation, and then you would take a vote.
Great. Well, I'll ask for a motion from the floor.
I so move.
I second.
Great. Any conversation among the group? Well, I will call for a vote now on that. All in favor, say aye.
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 Great. All opposed, say nay. Great. Great. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. So on the next meeting, we'll have specifics on get that written up and get everybody's okay on what that looks like. And I'm happy we're trying to chop wood here, so to speak, and work through everything. And again, Mark, Kayla, are there any additional follow-up items? I know we can talk through schedule as well. I just thought of that.
Really briefly, Hagood, if you want to mention, I did get responses from a little over half the folks about the subcommittee. And I think the way we envision those to go out is the weeks we're not meeting as a whole committee. That would be the weeks that the subcommittees can get together. And hey, good, we can get together and follow up some email over the next 48 hours. And, you know, it's about 3 to 4 folks on each committee and take consensus on when y'all want to meet, and you really will drive those meetings on that topic. But we'll get more information out about that. But I think that was the last thing from a logistical standpoint.
Great. No, thank you. Thank you. And then, you know, for the next meeting, I wish Laura is on. Okay, great. So next meeting we'd like to do is go through a design subject will be design focused. That'll be you know, Alan Davis with the City Design Center and his ongoing work, and the Sherwood report as well, as sponsored by the Coastal Conservation League. Thank you for that. And then you know, looking at biohabitats, and also, you know, you can discuss kind of pros and cons on each front. So yeah, a design focus, and also discussing the administrative items then as well. But yeah, just as far as wrap up and everything along those fronts, any other final points or questions or anything along those lines for the core, or Galen, Mark, or me, or anybody?
If I could just very quickly just ask Wes one question. It's a question I get all the time, and I think it's important for the committee to hear the answer directly from the core. And that is, what happens, Wes, if we get into beyond PED and we get into construction, and the city, for whatever reason, just doesn't have money that year or the next year to be able to come up with its cost share? What would this Army Corps do in a situation like that?
So great question, Mark. So we do this with all of our non-federal sponsors. Before we request money in a work plan or a president's budget, we go to the city of Charleston, in this case, and say, look, we've got $10 million worth of work to get started in design phase. We need $3.5 million from the city to match your cost share. Do you have that funding available? And usually we do this through letters, right? So we'll either do a memo or a letter, and then the city or the non-federal sponsor will write us back in a timely manner and state that, yes, we have the funding available, or no, we will need to defer till the next year. But we will not request money unless we get a commitment from a non-federal sponsor that that the funding is available. Because we wouldn't want to be in a situation where the Congress allocated us $10 million and we couldn't use it on the project because we didn't have a cost share match. That would be kind of a, you know, the ability to get future funding and then, or having to return that $10 million because the cost share match wasn't there would not be a good look, more or less. So we would only put money in the budget request if the city has the money available.
Well, I'll quickly.
It did. Thank you.
Wes, what I mean, to that point, is there a penalty to the city for something along those lines? You know, say the city goes and says, hey, you know, okay, got it.
So I will say here's the risk though, Haygood, and I'm happy you brought that up. City goes out there and acquires $100 million worth of real estate for this project. I'm just throwing that number out there. And then come to find out they can't award a construction contract or cost share construction contract. Now you're left with $100 million worth of easements, but with no ability to move forward past that real estate portion. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense. Thank you.
I just wanted to point that risk out as well.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from the group? Great. Well, thank you all, everybody, for your time and continued diligence going into this project. Certainly appreciate it. I think we're making great progress. So yeah, I look forward to seeing everybody 2 weeks from today, and then the folks on the subcommittees, be on the lookout for additional communication. Probably send out one more round of requests for interest for the subcommittees, but be on the lookout for additional communication on that front as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Enjoy your
Thanks.
day. Thanks a lot.